Why did every chair around her stay empty, even when the room was full? No one told her to sit apart. No one had to. The metal bench was cold beneath her legs. It always was, the kind of cold that crept through fabric and settled in bone. She folded her hands together, not to warm them but to steady them. A small habit, an old one, the kind you keep long after you forget why you started. Around her, voices bounced off steel walls. Laughter, bragging, youth echoing in a hangar that smelled like jet fuel and sun-burned asphalt. Men in crisp flight suits leaned against simulators, trading stories about G-forces and near misses like they were souvenirs from a vacation. She wasn't part of it. They called her Vance. Not Clara. Not anything personal. Just Vance, a name on a roster, a late addition, a bureaucratic mistake that nobody bothered correcting. They saw her gray strands tucked into a tight bun. They saw the fine lines at the edges of her eyes. They saw a woman who moved carefully, not slowly, but deliberately, as if conserving something precious inside her. They saw what they wanted to see. And what they saw was irrelevant. She didn't look offended. She didn't look wounded. But inside, something old shifted, the familiar ache of being underestimated, the quiet weight of being unseen. It wasn't new, it was just louder here. The instructor's boots struck the concrete with the confidence of someone who had never had to prove himself twice. His voice cut through the hangar like a saw. "This is a refresher course," he barked. "Not a playground. You desk flyers are here to remember which end of the aircraft goes forward." Some of the men laughed. His eyes slid to her, paused, then moved on. "Vance, you're last, you can watch." The implication didn't need explaining. She nodded once, almost invisible. Watching meant waiting. And she had spent a lifetime waiting. She didn't mind. Waiting gave her time to listen. Not to the men, but to the machines. The simulators hummed quietly like sleeping animals. Their cooling fans whispered. Their power systems pulsed beneath steel skins. Each one had a rhythm, a heartbeat. You could feel it if you stood close enough. She always had. The first pilot climbed into the nearest simulator with a grin, the kind that came from confidence that had never been tested by loss. He failed in under 2 minutes. So did the next. And the next. And the one after that. Each time, the room grew a little quieter. Each time, their laughter died just a little more. She stayed still, hands folded, eyes observing, breathing slow. They blamed the systems. They blamed the scenario. They blamed everything except themselves. She recognized the signs, fear, wearing the mask of frustration. A colonel entered the hangar. His presence alone bent the air. He studied the failed attempts on the monitor, jaw tightening. "Who's left?" The instructor hesitated. "Vance." The colonel looked at her for the first time. He saw what they all saw. A woman who didn't belong here. A problem to be processed and dismissed. "Let's get it over with," he said. She stood. Her joints didn't protest. Her balance didn't waver. Her expression didn't change. As she approached the simulator, she brushed her fingers lightly against its steel frame, a simple, quiet greeting. A technician noticed. Nobody else did. Inside the cockpit, the world narrowed to glass, data, and sound. This was familiar. Here she didn't have to pretend. Didn't have to shrink. Didn't have to explain herself. She closed her eyes for one breath. Not to calm herself, but to remember who she was when no one was watching. The simulation began. Targets bloomed across the screen. Threats layered over terrain. Digital voices whispered warnings. Behind the glass, they waited for her to fail. They always did. She didn't climb. She didn't charge. She dove straight into the Earth's shadow. Gasps rippled through the room. She let gravity take her, not recklessly but precisely. The terrain swallowed her radar signature. The mountains became her armor. She wasn't fighting the machine. She was listening to it. Every adjustment was measured. Every movement intentional. The enemy passed right over her, never knowing she was there. Then she rose behind them. Silent. Unseen. She didn't rush. She didn't waste. Her first shot was calm, clean, final. Then another. Two hostile icons vanished. The room went still. She disappeared back into the canyons before anyone could react. Now the men were leaning forward. Now they weren't laughing. Now they were holding their breath. She dismantled the battlefield piece by piece, not with speed, but with patience, with restraint, with a kind of mercy that only comes from someone who knows exactly how much damage she could do. And then the final wave appeared. 6 new threats. The impossible part of the scenario. The part that no one survived. She didn't run. She did something no one expected. She shut down her engine. The aircraft fell silent. For a moment, she became nothing but wind and shadow, and the enemy overshot her completely. When her engine roared back to life, she was already inside their formation. Missiles fired. Targets fell. The impossible collapsed into silence. The screen flashed. Mission complete. Threats neutralized. Survival probability, 100%. No one spoke. She stepped out of the cockpit, breathing even, face calm, as if she had just finished a puzzle. They stared at her like she wasn't real. The colonel finally stepped forward. "Who are you?" he tried to ask. But before the words fully formed, a voice from the hangar entrance broke the moment. "Sir, the White House is on a secure line." The silence deepened. "They're asking for her." She picked up the phone. "Yes, Mr. President." Every man in that room felt something shift inside his chest. Because the woman they had dismissed, the woman they had ignored, was not who they thought she was. And she hadn't even begun to show them why. Sometimes the strongest presence in a room isn't the loudest. Sometimes it's the one that waits, until it no longer has to. Why did her voice sound so calm when every system in the room was about to collapse? The secure handset still hummed faintly in her palm, a quiet electrical whisper, like a held breath that never fully left the lungs. She listened, not just to the voice on the other end, but to the silence between the words. That silence always carried more weight than the sentences themselves. "Yes," she said softly. Then, after a pause, "I understand." Around her the hangar had frozen in time. No boots moved. No one spoke. Even the machines seemed to hum a little more quietly, as if they, too, were listening. She didn't look at anyone when she ended the call. She set the phone back into its cradle with a controlled motion, as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. But something had. The colonel stood 3 steps away, his mouth slightly open, still trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the impossible score still glowing on the screen behind her. "You designed the protocol?" he finally asked. She didn't answer right away. Not because she didn't hear him, but because the truth was heavier than words. "There are some things," she said slowly, "that are built to never be used, and some people who are trained to never be seen." She met his eyes then. "I was both." The weight of that statement settled through the room like dust after a distant explosion. Someone swallowed loudly. She turned away before the questions could begin, before anyone could corner her into explaining a life that was never meant to be explained. Outside, the sound of rotors was growing closer. She walked toward the hangar doors. Each step echoed not loudly, but firmly, the sound of someone who had already made peace with leaving places behind. She passed the younger pilots. Their expressions had shifted. The laughter was gone, the casual confidence stripped away. What remained was something quieter, something humbler, something like awe and something like shame. She did not look at them, not out of anger, but because she knew what it felt like to be them years ago, before the world had taught her the price of certainty. The wind hit her face as she crossed into sunlight, hot, dry, real. The black helicopter waited, its rotors biting the air. As she climbed aboard, her thoughts drifted backward, not to victories, but to the moments that came before them. To the beginning. To the first time she learned what silence could cost. She had not always been Spectre. Once she had been Clara, a junior analyst who sat in rooms no one noticed. She carried coffee, took notes, kept her questions small. She learned early that intelligence didn't make noise, it listened. She memorized patterns, built quiet models, flagged anomalies that no one else had time to see. One of those anomalies would later be called a coincidence. 3 of them would become a pattern. By the 5th, she had discovered a shadow network that didn't exist, at least not on paper. She took her findings to a supervisor. He smiled. He thanked her. He filed it away. 2 weeks later, the network detonated a convoy in Kandahar. 6 people died. She stopped smiling after that. She stopped believing that being polite was enough. That night she stayed awake, staring at her ceiling, not crying, not praying, but listening to the weight inside her chest asking a single question. If you see something coming, and you stay quiet, are you still innocent? Her life split at that moment, even if she didn't realize it yet. The next report she built was impossible to ignore. She triple-verified every number. She coded the projections herself. She left nothing open to doubt. They called her in. They didn't thank her. They asked her how she knew. Then they asked her who else knew. Then they asked her to sign documents she wasn't allowed to read. That was the first door. She walked through it quietly. Training came later. Not the kind they advertised. The kind that stripped away your habits first, then your name. She learned to fly without relying on instruments, learned to land in blackout conditions, learned to make decisions in the narrow space between 2 heartbeats. They didn't teach her how to fight. They taught her how to disappear. Years blurred into missions she was never allowed to talk about, places she could not mark on a map, people who thanked her without knowing her name. Every time she came home, she felt a little more like a ghost. And then came the mission that ended everything. The one that left her alone on a ridge line with a broken radio, 2 fractured ribs, and a storm that erased tracks as fast as she made them. She completed it. But the team she went in with did not. They never found 2 of them. Her debrief was short, clinical, quiet. She was offered another assignment. She declined. They offered her a desk. She accepted. Not because she was done, but because she needed to remember how to be human again. She buried Spectre beneath reports, logistics chains, procurement systems, and silence. Years passed. She aged. She slowed down not in ability but in posture, in presence, in visibility. People stopped looking at her, which made her safer than she had ever been. Until the phone rang. And the past knocked. The helicopter lifted off. She stared out the window at the shrinking base, at the hangar that would never forget her. She wasn't proud. She wasn't afraid. She was tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. And yet beneath the fatigue, something else stirred. A sense that maybe, just maybe, this last mission was the one that could finally balance the scales. Not with heroics, but with truth. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive like a victory. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of a phone call, and a woman who finally steps out of the shadows she once built. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like she no longer belongs there. Why did the sun feel colder the higher the helicopter climbed? She noticed it the moment the rotors tilted forward, that subtle shift when gravity stopped holding on and the earth began to slide away beneath her. The desert stretched into a muted tapestry of dust and forgotten roads, and with it came a strange sense of distance. Not physical, emotional, like she was watching her own life recede in reverse. She didn't speak during the flight. Not because she had nothing to say, but because every word she didn't say had already been written into classified files, burned into black vaults, buried under acronyms that no one outside certain rooms would ever read. Across from her sat a young airman who had been told only two things: fly straight and don't ask questions. He kept glancing at her, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with something close to reverence. He didn't know why. She knew exactly why. The Black Hawk sliced through cloud layers, climbing toward a sky that looked too clean to trust. Her reflection in the tinted glass was faint, barely there, and she studied it like she was meeting herself for the first time in years. She looked older, not just in skin, in eyes. There was a tired steadiness in them now, a quiet that had replaced urgency, a calm that had been carved by long nights and closed-door decisions. She remembered when she used to shake before missions. She didn't anymore. That scared her more than fear ever had. They landed at Andrews under silence protocols. No press, no greetings, just a black SUV waiting like an unmarked promise. Inside, the world narrowed again, to radio silence, secure tunnels, steel hallways that swallowed sound. She was guided, not escorted. Everyone stepped aside without being told. She passed flags she had once sworn to, offices she had once avoided, doors that didn't exist on floor plans. Then she was alone in a small room. A single chair, a table, a screen that stayed dark. She waited. Waiting had become her talent. When the screen finally flickered to life, it didn't show a face, just a silhouette. "Spectre," a voice said quietly. The name landed differently now, heavier, more intimate. "I never stopped being her," Clara replied. "I just stopped being useful." The voice paused. "That's why we're calling." A file appeared on the screen. Coordinates, flight patterns, encrypted images. A cargo aircraft, civilian registration, but its interior schematics told a different story. Modified bays, shielded compartments, a moving vault. "A private contractor has built something inside that plane," the voice said. "Something we can't trace, something that doesn't exist." "Ghost protocol," she said softly. "Yes. They're planning to launch it tonight," the voice continued. "We don't know where it's going, we don't know what it does, but every model says once it moves, it can't be stopped." Clara leaned back slowly. "And you need someone who remembers how it was built," she said. "And someone who can get close enough to stop it." The screen went dark. A door opened behind her. A uniformed officer stood there, his face tight. "Your gear is ready." She stood. Her knees didn't protest. Her breath stayed even. But inside, something old stirred awake. They walked through a corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and ozone. A preparation bay opened before her, quiet, efficient, impersonal. On the table lay a suit she hadn't worn in over a decade. Black, lightweight, lined with tech that still knew her measurements better than any tailor. Her name wasn't on it, just a symbol. She touched it with the same gentle respect she had once given her aircraft. A technician cleared his throat, "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking." She looked at him. "Why come back?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. "Because some mistakes never stop calling," she said. "They just wait until you're finally willing to listen." She suited up in silence. Each clasp clicked into place like a memory locking itself shut. Her reflection in the mirror was no longer Clara, and not fully Spectre. It was something in between, a woman carrying two lives inside the same skin. They briefed her quickly. The aircraft would depart from a private strip in less than 4 hours. Its route would keep it in neutral airspace. No intercepts allowed, no mistakes tolerated. Her insertion would be solo. She wouldn't be extracted. "You'll have one window," they said, 10 minutes. She nodded. 10 minutes was a lifetime. 10 minutes was everything. As they moved her toward the launch point, her thoughts wandered again, not to fear, but to faces she hadn't allowed herself to remember in years. A teammate who laughed too loud. Another who hummed while cleaning weapons. A third who always kept a photo of his daughter in his pocket. She wondered if the world had been kinder to their families than it had been to their names. She wondered if this mission, this final act, would finally give their ghosts somewhere to rest. Outside, the night was falling. The sky darkened into velvet. And somewhere in that darkness, a plane was preparing to carry something that should never exist. She took a slow breath. And for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear. Hope. Why did the night feel like it was holding its breath? The cargo plane rolled down the private runway like it had nothing to hide. Its navigation lights blinked gently, polite, almost friendly. No markings, no flags, no visible weaponry, just another contractor flight sliding into the dark like it belonged there. Spectre watched from a ridge line half a mile away. She lay flat against cold stone, her body perfectly still, her breathing slow enough to disappear. Through her optics, she could see crew members moving around the aircraft. Their movements were casual, unhurried, the behavior of people who didn't believe in consequences. She knew that look. It was the same look her first commander had worn before Kandahar. Inside her ear, a faint comm channel murmured with telemetry. She let it pass. Her attention stayed on the plane. This wasn't about interception. This was about proximity. Timing. Patience. Her insertion window opened when the last cargo handler stepped away from the rear ramp. 3 seconds later, she moved. She didn't run. She slid. Across gravel. Across shadow. Across the invisible seam where the world forgot to look. Her body remembered what her mind no longer needed to command. Every footstep placed, not guessed. Every breath measured, not hoped. She reached the landing gear just as the engines deepened their pitch, that low rumble that vibrated through bone. She climbed. Slowly, quietly. The metal was cold, slick with oil residue and night dew. Her gloves found every bolt by feel alone. By the time the aircraft began to roll, she was already inside its shadow. She pulled herself into the underbelly access bay just as the wheels left the ground. Gravity shifted. Her stomach dipped. She closed her eyes for half a second. Not to steady herself, but to accept what came next. Inside, the bay was narrow, dark, lined with wiring that pulsed faint blue. The plane climbed through cloud cover and moisture began to bead along the walls. She exhaled slowly and crawled forward. Her first obstacle was the security lattice, a biometric barrier designed to read heat, pulse, and gait. She didn't rush it. She lay still, heart slowing, body temperature lowering, a trick taught to only a few. The sensors passed over her and moved on. She slipped beneath the grid and into the inner corridor. The hum changed here. Lower, deeper. The sound of something drawing power. Her boot brushed against a loose cable. She froze. Waited. No alarms. Good. She reached the first access terminal and slid in a thin blade of light, her handheld interface linking to the aircraft's ghost network. What came up made her jaw tighten. The payload wasn't just shielded. It was learning. Adaptive code. Self-correcting algorithms. A system designed to evolve mid-flight. Whoever had built this wasn't just reckless. They were ambitious. And ambition had a way of forgetting the people it crushed. She moved deeper. Past unmarked doors. Past sleeping crew. She could hear them breathing, snoring, someone murmuring in a dream. They had no idea what they were carrying. That didn't make them innocent. But it made this harder. She reached the cargo bay. And there it was. A container the size of a small room, black, seamless, floating on magnetic supports. Its surface shimmered faintly, like oil over water. The ghost core. Her chest tightened. This was her design. Not the hardware, but the architecture. The logic of it. She had created the skeleton of this system years ago, a defensive contingency model that could hijack hostile networks and neutralize them in minutes. It had never been meant to be built. But someone had. And they had removed the restraints. She approached the interface panel. Her hands hovered over the port. She hesitated, because disabling it wouldn't just stop a weapon. It would erase a version of her, the one who believed logic alone could protect the world. She connected. Data flooded her vision. The ghost core wasn't waiting. It was awake. A soft tone pulsed through the bay. A voice not human, but shaped like one, whispered through her interface. Identity recognized. Her breath caught. They had used her original encryption key. They had built it to trust her. The machine had learned her voice, her patterns, her decisions. It knew her. And now it was waiting for her to choose. The countdown timer flickered to life on her display. 00, 10, 00. 10 minutes. The door behind her hissed. Someone was standing there. Why did her hands begin to shake only when everything else was finally under control? The door's hiss barely registered in the vast hum of the aircraft, but her body caught it instantly. She turned slowly, keeping her breath steady, one hand hovering near the interface, the other relaxed at her side, not threatening, not submissive, just present. A man stood in the doorway. Late 40s, civilian contractor jacket, eyes tired in a way that came from too many nights pretending to believe in what you were building. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't shout. He just stared at her, and then at the ghost core behind her. "You weren't supposed to be real," he said quietly. She tilted her head slightly. "Neither was this." His jaw tightened. "They paid us to finish a design," he replied. "They said the original architect was dead." Her eyes softened just a fraction. "They always say that." The countdown on her display ticked silently. 0912. 0911. "You built the backbone of it," he continued, "but you never gave us the conscience layer." "I didn't think it would be used," she said. "That's the problem with hope," he muttered. "It leaves room for people like us." He stepped closer slowly, not hostile, not safe either. "We can still control it," he said. "Redirect it, sell it to the highest bidder. No one has to die tonight." Her chest tightened. "Someone always does," she whispered. She looked back at the ghost core. The machine pulsed faintly, as if listening. "You don't understand what this becomes once it launches," she said. "It won't just neutralize systems. It will rewrite decision-making itself. It will become the quiet voice that chooses who gets to move and who doesn't. He hesitated. You're saying it will replace us. I'm saying it will simplify us, she replied. She turned back to him. And simplified humans don't stay human for long. The countdown ticked. 07:48. He exhaled sharply. You can't stop it alone. She nodded once. I know. She stepped back, away from the interface. For a moment, he thought she was surrendering. She was. She reached into her suit and withdrew a slim device, no bigger than a pen. She pressed it to the ghost core's lower panel. A faint vibration rippled across the container. What did you just do? He asked. I gave it something you never coded, she said softly. What? Her voice lowered. Doubt. The machine's glow flickered. Its internal processes hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, long enough for her to move. She crossed the bay in 2 steps and struck him cleanly across the throat, not hard, precise, enough to drop him without damage. She lowered him gently to the floor. I'm sorry, she whispered and meant it. The ghost core pulsed erratically now. Her display lit up with warnings. Conflicting parameters. Logic loop deity. Self-reference anomaly. The machine was thinking about itself. She returned to the interface. Her fingers hovered and then moved. She rewrote her own design. She inserted a final constraint. Not a firewall. Not a lock. A question. If you can choose, who should you protect first? The ghost core paused. The countdown froze at 04:12. The aircraft shuddered slightly as turbulence rolled through. The machine began redirecting power inward. Self-limiting. Self-isolating. Self-canceling. She watched the core dim. Her throat tightened. This was the version of the system she had always hoped would exist. One that could stop and ask before it acted. The ghost core shut down. The aircraft continued flying, but now it was just a plane again. She exhaled slowly. Her hands finally began to shake. Because now there was nothing left to distract her from what she had almost created. She sat down against the wall. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight. The regret. The grief. The quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this was enough. Why did she feel lighter only after everything inside her finally hurt? The aircraft continued its steady climb through the night, unaware that the future it had been meant to carry had just been quietly dismantled. No alarms. No explosions. No headlines waiting to be written. Just a machine that had learned to stop. Spectre sat against the cargo bay wall, her knees drawn slightly inward, her gloved hands resting on her thighs. The trembling had faded, but the echo of it remained, a reminder that she was still human beneath the layers of silence and training. Her eyes drifted to the man on the floor. He was breathing steadily. Alive. That mattered to her more than she expected. She closed her eyes for a long breath and pressed 2 fingers lightly against the calm stud in her ear. Payload neutralized, she said quietly. There was a pause on the line. Then a voice, careful and steady, confirm. It shut itself down, she replied. It won't wake again. Another pause, longer this time. You're clear, the voice finally said. We're rerouting the aircraft. Stand by for extraction. She didn't answer immediately. Extraction. It sounded like a promise, but promises had a way of feeling different once they were within reach. She stood slowly, testing her balance. Her ribs ached faintly, old injuries reminding her they still existed. She walked once more to the ghost core and rested her palm lightly against its dark surface. It was cold now. Quiet. You almost became something terrible, she murmured. So did I. The words lingered in the air, not for the machine but for herself. She turned away. Minutes passed. The lights dimmed slightly as the plane altered course. A gentle shift in gravity followed, subtle but unmistakable. The door behind her opened. A small extraction team entered, their movements professional, restrained, respectful. No one asked her name. No one questioned her presence. They didn't need to. One of them handed her a headset. "Ma'am, we're ready." She nodded once. As they guided her toward the exit ramp, she glanced back at the cargo bay, at the place where a future had almost been decided without anyone knowing. She felt no triumph, only relief, and something close to forgiveness. The descent was brief. Cool night air rushed past her as the extraction craft pulled her into its shadow. Within minutes, the cargo plane was just another blinking light in the dark sky, indistinguishable from every other aircraft crossing invisible lines. She sat quietly in the back of the extraction craft, helmet resting on her knee, watching clouds drift by like slow-moving thoughts. She thought of the young pilots at Fort Halloween. The laughter, the assumptions, the silence that had followed her demonstration. She wondered if any of them would remember her not as Spectre, but as the woman who had quietly reminded them that skill does not need an audience. She reached up and removed the small communicator from her ear. The world felt quieter. Not empty, just gentler. Later, in a debrief room that didn't exist on any public blueprint, she declined medals she wouldn't wear. She signed documents she wouldn't keep. She answered questions that would never be repeated. And when it was over, they offered her a position, a return, a chance to step back into the world she had left behind. She considered it. Then she shook her head. "I think," she said softly, "I've done enough deciding for one lifetime." They let her go. Not because they didn't need her, but because they finally understood what she had already given. Weeks later, she sat on a quiet porch somewhere that didn't ask her for anything. The air smelled faintly of rain and warm earth. A small cup of tea steamed in her hands. She watched the sky change colors, slow, patient, forgiving. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for a call. She wasn't listening for alarms. She was just breathing. And in that stillness, she realized something simple, something true. That strength doesn't always arrive as noise. That courage doesn't need an audience. That the most powerful choices are often made quietly, far from applause. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.